the Female Finance Collective, where we encourage women to have open and honest conversations about all things money. Today, we're continuing our series on financial literacy, and in this episode, we'll share with you some intermediate financial literacy skills and why they are important. All of the Female Finance Collective episodes are about financial literacy, but we want to get clear on exactly what that means in this episode. And as a reminder, personal finances are highly personal, and there are many aspects to consider. We are sharing information for educational and conversational purposes, and this is not specific advice. We're here to share our ideas and what works for us. So getting to the intermediate financial literacy stage is exciting because suddenly you realize that there are so many different options for you to consider when it comes to your finances and also to building a life that you really enjoy. And when we're at this planning stage, we zoom out the lens and we're starting to think forward. And I'd love to hear from you guys on what this means to you, and if you've got any great tips to share for the intermediate planners.
All right, I'll jump in. So when I was a foundational money person and I was still just learning and everything, I was afraid to think forward. I think that's the first thing that popped into my mind when you said that. I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing today, like how I'm gonna get the groceries paid for, can I afford that? So thinking forward was not an option for me. So once I had that foundational skill set, I guess is what I'll say, it was much easier to start thinking about things that were coming in the future beyond the month, right? And how I was going to make it through the month with my paycheck. So also in all of that, I was only getting paid once a month at that time. So it's really tricky to balance it all as a month. So I was really I'm here in this month and that is all I can do. So thinking forward for me started to be planning. I started thinking about what it would feel like if my debt was paid off. What kinds of things would I be able to save for? What might I like to purchase? Was there something for my house that I might want to be able to pay for? Was there travel that I wanted to do? And so thinking forward for me really started like that, getting out of the immediate survival mode and thinking about what I might be able to do with my money in the future. I also think that for the first time, I really thought about I could actually retire. I know that sounds silly when you're in your early 30s, but I was like, I have so much debt and I cannot save enough money. How am I ever going to retire? And then once I was like, okay, I can do this, I really did also start thinking about that too. So that thinking forward for me was really just about getting out of the immediate time of my life and what might be able to come in the future.
Yeah, when I think about thinking forward, I shared in the last episode, the foundational financial literacy episode from last week, how I really started investing finally into an emergency fund. That was my first time I was thinking forward that I might need some cash in the future if something happened. And that kind of thinking started leading to some changes in my budgeting. So before that, I was like you, Jen, kind of living month to month. I had, some travel goals. I had some other little goals, but it was more what do I need for this month? Once I realized I wanted to start building this emergency fund, I realized, okay, I'm going to need some extra money to put into that emergency fund. Where am I going to get that money from? So it kind of changed my budgeting. It also helped my budgeting in a way that I was able now to prioritize things in my budget. So I was living in Shanghai, China, and travel is a really important part of my budget. And so it wasn't until I started thinking forward about, okay, I'm going to want to save to get up to 3 to 6 months savings in an emergency fund. But I also really want to prioritize travel. So I had to start budgeting differently and allotting money to different places. And once I started doing that, it really made me realize that whole retirement thing, like you said, Jen, too. And I need to start being able to invest some money. So that transformation going from I need to put some into an emergency fund really led to other big aspects that fulfilled me as far as travel and then thinking about retirement for the first time in my life, and also starting to learn to invest money. So that mindset shift, once I moved from foundational to a planner, was just transformational. That's really where I could see myself like, I am in charge. I do have some confidence now. I can travel the amount I want to travel. I can save to put in my emergency fund. And I'm even going to learn how to invest and start working towards investing for my retirement too.
Jen, that picture you painted, I remember being in that exact spot of having that transformation of going from feeling fearful and feeling like I was stuck every month. I remember thinking I won't be able to travel, or I can't buy, a new dining room table because I was just so stuck. And then you get to that magic point where suddenly you can plan, like your finances are, you have the foundation down and you're starting to think about paying down debt and building savings, and you can see the future of being able to travel or being able to take a course that can generate more income for you in the future. Like the world just really, really starts to open up. And I know the place that I started, I had never had an emergency fund before. I always saved, but it was like this delicate dance between, saving and paying down the debt that was required. But it was really life-changing in terms of planning to have that emergency fund so that when I had an unexpected car repair, I had the money, and it was no longer where, like, I don't know about you guys, but when you take a car to the mechanic, it feels like you can't breathe for that few hours until they call you and tell you the diagnosis. We had this recently. We had a ginormous car repair bill. Like I can't even believe it could be that big. And that was, I'd say, the first time in, several years where it struck me that way. But you're just kind of nervous waiting for this diagnosis. And the emergency fund or safety fund was the first step. And what I did with mine is I put it in a high interest savings account so that I'm earning, at least something on that money. If I don't need to use it, it's great. It's earning a little bit. And if I do need to use it, so like we needed to for that car repair, then we start the steps to replenish that. So you're constantly thinking, you're forward oriented, you're thinking of, what you need to do to plan out your finances. Do you guys have any thoughts around debt and what that looked like for you when you were at that intermediate planning stage with your finances?
For me, I still had debt for sure because mine was a project. I had a little project to pay off. And also this is the thing too that I think this is slightly off track, but I think we'll get there. My debt was not like it. For some people with a certain level of income, if they knew my debt number, I can't remember exactly what it was, but if they knew how much I owed, they'd be like, that is not that big of a deal. You could probably pay that off in a few months. But with the income that I had and the amount of money, like my income was not that much. And with the expenses I had every month to like live, I just didn't have that much to dedicate toward it, right? So as I became more financially literate and I learned more, I could do things like get a second job and dedicate the vast majority of that to my debt. I could do things like rearrange my budget a little bit so that I could dedicate more money towards paying it off. So it was kind of this process for me about how I learned to finagle my money in a way as I became more financially literate. And so how it impacted my debt was it didn't make my debt go away when I got to like this level, but it made it easier for me to manage and easier for me to come up with a plan to pay it off. Because before, I literally was trying to figure out how to make the minimum payment, and I knew that wasn't enough. So then I was trying to figure out how to make a little more than the minimum payment, but I wasn't really figuring out all the pieces of the puzzle to make that manageable. So going from a foundational kind of a foundation builder up to a planner allowed me the kind of the I had the knowledge then to be a little bit more strategic in how I managed it and how I paid it off. So I guess that's kind of how debt was impacted for me. I still had it, but I was just a lot smarter about how to pay it off.
Yeah, my story is a little different. So I didn't have debt, but I was a part-time kindergarten teacher. My husband was a teacher. We had very little money coming in. We had a very small starter home. And what we did is we just lived a super simple life. So while we didn't go in debt, we were definitely living paycheck to paycheck. But then I moved to Shanghai, China, and I went to full-time teaching. So my salary increased. And so what I really had to do was make sure I wasn't spending more as I made more. So a lot of times, even if you do have debt and you finally get it paid off and you have this extra money all of a sudden, most people end up spending more. The more you make, the more you spend is kind of sadly the rule of thumb, the way we work, right? And so that's more of my story of like all of a sudden increasing my salary with moving back to full-time work and in another country where I, was paid more as a teacher. I had to really take that moment of transition and be a planner to, okay, I have these other goals. I do have some extra money now than what I've been living on for the last 8 years. And so how am I going to be sure to plan forward at that point? And so although I think I don't know if you guys would agree, but once you get out of debt, you have to then figure out where that money is going to go that you had been allotting there, right? And not just all of a sudden go back into spending more habits, even if you have the money, to not let yourself spend it away, but instead meet some of your financial goals that you might have to help your future self.
Yeah, goal setting is a really important piece with that. And I remember with my debt journey, a lot of the original debt I had was for setting up a household. It was getting through the really lean years when our kids were in daycare and daycare was very expensive. So we ended up taking on some debt just for the privilege of working. And then once I got to that more intermediate stage, debt started to be for something future oriented. So I upgraded my education. I borrowed the money to do that. I bought a rental property, borrowed the money to do that. So I actually took on more debt in the intermediate stage than I had when, I was at that beginning foundation of just getting more serious about my finances. So one of the changes that does happen is usually when you're at the beginning foundation, your goal setting is very near-term focused. When you're intermediate, you start to think about what's coming up in the medium term. So say within the next year or so. And then as Jen shared, you're starting to also think about long-term. And our most long-term goal is often retirement. But it can also be things like paying your mortgage down or taking a 1-year sabbatical, like just starting to look at some of the goals that are beyond the day to day. And, that's just like an important, that's a great, exciting part of being in this planning stage. What was the experience like for you guys?
I think it was exciting because I could think about the future. I could think about planning and I could think ahead, and it felt realistic rather than like some pie in the sky, oh, someday kind of thing, right? And I think that was the hugest shift for me, was having everything. I don't know that I set goals when I was foundation builder, and we didn't talk about that when we talked about that level, but I think it's because I didn't even know what my goal would be, right? I like to still have money at the end of the month, I guess would have been my goal, right? And so then once I got to that next level, I could actually set goals that felt realistic. Okay, I want to have this debt paid to this level by this time. I want to be able to have this amount of money in savings by this time. I want to be able to buy a plane ticket for this trip without using my credit card. Like those types of things were what I was working toward. And it felt, they weren't like super long term or anything. I also upped my percentage contribution to my 401k plan because that felt like I had a little bit more money that I could contribute to that. And I understood the importance of that at this level. So I think that's what it was. It just felt kind of empowering to be able to think forward that way and realize that those goals were realistic.
Same. I really was excited because when I got to the planning stage, I started talking to people about money finally. It wasn't this like hidden secret within me. And what I learned is that other people like to talk about money and are doing some things you never even thought of, right? And so, like you said, Marilee, like you can start to look at, we talked about good versus bad debt in one of the past episodes. You can start to look at debt to buy a property, to be a rental home, or to live in yourself as being maybe a good thing for you at this planning stage because you have some long-term goals, right? And that's a long-term, buying real estate, a long-term investment. And so I really got excited and motivated. I had confidence that I could do it because I had been tracking my numbers. I had been budgeting. And I had that confidence built because others around me were doing it. And they were just like me. They were teachers like me. They were people who also wanted to get together after school. We started a little money club. And that's really where it began for me, with this small group of teachers talking about money, exactly what this podcast is. So many years later, it's funny to think about, but it normalized it, right? Going from not talking about it with anybody, maybe not even my spouse enough, to talking about it with a group of people who I had to build trust with, because it can be very scary, was a huge, huge, important piece for me. It made me want to learn more so I can better contribute to those conversations. It made me want to question more and open my mind to more possibilities. And it made me want to plan for my future. And that's huge because then my spending decisions weren't near as hard because I could easily pass something up because I wanted to travel instead, because I wanted to invest instead, because I wanted to get a property instead. So that was a huge transformational place for me. I loved it.
I found that too, that the more that I connected with my finances, the more I learned about myself. And when I had those really specific values, like when I really understood what I loved to spend money on and what wasn't meaningful, that made the process so much easier. And I actually enjoyed looking at my money. So if I didn't have a look at where I stood each week, it would be like something was missing in my life. So it was exciting, it was enjoyable, and that was the biggest transformation. And what I see with clients too is at this intermediate stage, they're just more comfortable. Like if they have a goal, they know how to work out the math on what that looks like to make that goal happen. And that's a really, really important skill. The other thing they learn is how to brainstorm. So if they have a goal, they can start to think about what the pros are, what the cons are for a decision that they're facing, and what kind of action steps that they need to take. And they have a routine or a ritual that they do on a regular basis to look at their finances. And, they're able to kind of incorporate more decision making because they've boosted their confidence and they've actually seen some results with the work that they're doing around their money.
Yeah, and my learning changed a bit. I was very much consuming at the foundational stage, right? And at the planner stage, I started creating like what I want to do. And so an example of that is just going from watching somebody on YouTube talk about getting a mortgage and turning it into a short-term rental, the property into a short-term rental, to going on NerdWallet and using a mortgage calculator next to that, using an investment calculator. Okay, does it make sense for me to go try to do real estate? Does it make sense for me to try to do investing in the stock market first, or one or the other, right? So my learning started to get more hands-on, and kind of, I guess, taking what I was learning and applying it possibly to me. Like you said, Marilee, like the brainstorming leveled up. I could imagine, because I was hearing about different things from different people as well as my own learning, and then I could try it out digitally, right? Or what are people saying are the pros of this? What are people saying are the cons of this? What might work for me? So I was able to like level up that learning in that application way.
I think that's good. And I think I just want to also reiterate. I feel like I'm always the like bring it back down just in case people are overwhelmed person, because that's me. If what Sybil is talking about is exciting and you're like, yes, I am into that, like, let me take that next step, that is awesome. Do it. If you're like, whoa, I feel like I just arrived on this foundational level and like buying a second property has never occurred to me and that is giving me a panic attack, that is okay, right? If you're at this level and you're like, look at me, I'm starting to learn, and you start to look into your employer's 401k plan and look at your investment options and like increase your percentage and make a choice of the funds that they've offered you, that is perfect. If you, Marilee talked about a high interest savings account. If you are like, let me open one of those and let me start putting some money in there so that I'm building with a higher interest rate, that is perfectly fine. This is a spectrum, right? This level is not just all right here. It's like this. So if you're right here and you just landed on this level, that is a perfect place to be. Also, if you're just listening, I'm putting my hands really far apart. And if you just got to the bottom platform of, planning, that's fine. If you're at the top and you're getting ready to jump to the third level, then that's okay too. But I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed by what we're talking about. The whole point here is to have these conversations so that you can learn and hear and understand what other people's thought processes are and pick and choose what works for you, what makes sense to you, and what resonates with you. There was a long time I never thought we would own rental property. Now we own one. So, that had to get to that stage in my life when that made sense for me. So also, embarrassingly enough, we have a lot of money invested in a lot of different ways. We just opened a high yield savings account like a month ago. So we're all over the place, all of us, and that is absolutely okay.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Jen. I was going to say, like, I've had an emergency fund savings for a while now, but just recently put it into a high yield savings account. That's the thing, is like about money and about the climate of money, is that we're all going to do different things in different orders and not do some and others will do some. And it might not be for 5 years from now where that decision makes sense. And in 5 years from now, you might not want your money in a high yield savings account because they might be super low again, right? Like, so absolutely. I love that.
And if you want to know, if you're like, what's a high yield savings account? Just Google it. They're super easy to find. They're everywhere. You can find them without any fees and you can set them up online in honestly like under 10 minutes. So if you're curious what we're talking about, just Google it and tons of information will pop right up for you because I think they're kind of popular right now. A lot of people are putting their money in them because the interest rate is good.
Exactly. Yeah. So thank you for listening. Remember, we'd love to hear from you. Send your thoughts, send your questions. Be sure to subscribe and like our podcast so you don't miss any episodes. And we look forward to chatting with you next time.